very proud and honored to be a part of this gathering in the Indian American community, the South Asian American community in the greater Cleveland area, to show our support for the African American community in its struggle. I'm going to talk to you briefly about a few things that I hope will all connect together at the end for you as to why we have to participate in direct action. I'm going to start off with a story about the Tamir Rice case, the end of that matter, in which the family was seeking, and Samaria Rice, Tamir's mother, was seeking justice from the criminal justice system for the unjustified police slaying of her child while he was playing in Cadell Park on the west side of Cleveland. Samaria was just a few blocks away, preparing a meal for her kids. Her kids used to walk down to the rec center all the time and participate in the activities down there, when a knock came on her door informing her that Tamir had been shot. And for 2 years, she waited for the criminal justice system to deliver justice. We, as her lawyers, knew that the system was stacked against her, that rarely does the criminal justice system hold police officers accountable. And if you think about it, you understand the reasons for that. It's that the relationship between the police departments and the police officers and the prosecutors are too close. Day in and day out, they work together. And so, at a subconscious level at a minimum, and sometimes at a conscious level, there is this desperation to exonerate the officers no matter what they've done and no matter what our own eyes show us nowadays on the videos that are captured. So what did they do? The prosecutors used the grand jury system. Grand juries exist as a check on police power and on prosecutorial power. It's ordinary citizens like us who go, but what they hear is a secret proceeding that's conducted behind closed doors in secret with no opportunity for the victim's family to advocate there. And so what they did was create a process that had a preordained result. How do we know this? Something very unusual happened in that case when the prosecutor announced the grand jury has decided not to charge the officers. The police union bragged about the fact that they were permitted to have the officers go to the grand jury. And I also do white-collar criminal defense work, and I can tell you no criminal defense attorney ever lets their client go and testify before the grand jury because it's a one-sided proceeding. It would be a mistake. But here, the officers went with pre-written statements. And they took the oath, and they read the statements as if it was a press conference, and they faced no cross-examination. And so, of course, the grand jurors believed whatever they said. And we would have never known about that special treatment being given to police officers that no other target of a criminal investigation in this county or anywhere else in America is ever afforded. We would have never known about that if the union hadn't bragged about it. And so the family of Tamir Rice was deprived of any opportunity for justice, much less justice itself. And it's that corruption of systems that deprives us all of a sense that we have fairness and justice when it comes to police violence. What I'd like to do now is very briefly describe to you, almost in bullet points, and you can go and Google and research these things yourself if you're interested, but I'm going to give you a quick summary of the additional kinds of impediments besides the close relationship between prosecutors and police officers. I'm going to give you a few of the other challenges for us to have, for us having a level playing field in the justice system when it comes to unjustified police violence. First, I've already alluded to it, this close relationship between the police unions and the contracts that they strike. You know, you may not know this, but it continuously is shocking to me that if you have a police officer who's interacted with you or a member of our community in a negative and improper way, and you then try to do a public records request for that officer's personnel file, the union contract requires the Division of Police to remove everything negative from that file that's more than 3 years old. So if you have an officer who has a history of police brutality, if you have an officer who has a history of racism, you may never find out about it. So it's those union contracts and the excessive power of the police unions that can really decay our ability to have justice. Another big thing that you've probably heard a lot of talk about, and I'd say this is really high up there, it is the concept of qualified immunity. It's the concept that courts, and courts literally made this up. The Supreme Court of the United States literally made this up. It is in no statute. They said that even though there's a federal civil rights statute that says you can hold governmental officials accountable in civil court for violations of the Constitution, we're going to let government officials, especially police officers, get off if you can't point to, it's called qualified immunity, you can't point to an incident just like this one that happened before. And so, the taser wasn't shot in that particular way at that particular moment, the gun wasn't fired in this particular way at that particular moment, we're going to exonerate the officers and you get nothing, victim of police brutality. It's a terrible thing. And as somebody who represents victims of police brutality day in and day out, we see really good cases die in the courts based on this just tortured interpretation of the Constitution, which is nowhere there in the text. It's just made up. A couple of other items, and then I'll move on to some of the solutions. One of the other big impediments here is the fact that the public has, until the incident of George Floyd, has not fully understood just how pervasive this problem is. We had the Eric Garner incident in New York, the first famous I Can't Breathe case. We had what happened to Tamir Rice. We had what happened to Trayvon Martin and Michael Brown and so many others. And we should say their names. We should learn their names and we should say their names. But what we've had is a situation where I think the public at large has thought it's an isolated problem or it's not a problem. And that issue is finally changing. And the final issue, and there are many other impediments, but I'll mention this, and that is that we haven't had enough, we've had a problem with the kinds of judges that are being appointed to the federal courts. And especially over the last few years, we have seen judges who are deeply hostile to individual constitutional rights, particularly when it comes to police violence. And that too has to change. So let me offer you some quick solutions. There were some great ideas that were just offered, some concrete things that can be done. But there is an actual bill pending that Speaker Pelosi and Senator Kamala Harris and others have introduced in Congress. It is a police reform bill, including a change in this qualified immunity standard, changing the standard so that the burden isn't on a plaintiff to show there was a willful effort to deliberately violate constitutional rights. Even doing it recklessly would be sufficient. These are significant changes in the law. And a ban on chokeholds, and many other items that represent a good start. Now, I think because of the political momentum we've seen here, because of rallies and protests like this, I actually give that bill a fair chance of passage. And if not this year, then next year if we have a new president. So I urge everybody to call Senator Rob Portman. You can call Senator Brown too, but he's already supportive of the bill. Call Senator Rob Portman's office. You can use the contact form online and tell him to vote for the police reform bill that the Democrats have sponsored. That is a key piece to getting reform started here, in addition to reforms that can happen at the state and local level. Finally, let me wrap up in saying this. Many, many people of South Asian origin and Indian American origin have faced, at some point or the other, discrimination in their lives. If you haven't, then God bless you. You've either led a charmed existence or you are in denial, like Bobby Jindal, but I won't get started on him. Or Nikki Haley, Nimrata Randhawa. But many of us have had those experiences. Sometimes it's been a threat of violence, sometimes it's been actual violence, Sometimes it's just words. Sometimes it's employment discrimination and discrimination in the workplace or in school. But if you look at the broad sweep of our lives, we have actually been very fortunate relative to the African American community. And we need to recognize that. But we need to recognize more that our successful existence in this great nation has occurred because we are standing on the shoulders of the sacrifices made by the African American community. If not for the civil rights movement, if not for Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., if not for John Lewis taking beatings on his skull with a police baton at the Edmund Pettus Bridge, if not for those things, there would have been no Immigration Reform Act of 1965, thereby ending the racist policies of only favoring European countries in American immigration and asking for the best and the brightest from India and other countries that aren't predominantly white to come to America. That was a direct result of the civil rights movement. And those of us who have children need to remember that. Our children and our grandchildren need to remember that. That we could not live the lives we live were it not for the sacrifices made by the African American community and by the continuing pain that they are enduring. So, I see some of my African American friends in the audience here. To you, I say this. I may not be a brother, but I'm a cousin. And one thing you should understand is that in the Indian American community, in the South Asian American communities, tell me if I'm wrong, everyone, your cousin brother and your cousin sister are exactly like your real brother and your real sister. It's exactly the same relationship. We actually have words for it. We actually have words for it. We call the cousin brother who's older Paya, which means elder brother. We call the cousin sister Didi, which means sister. It is the same relationship. And while we cannot begin to fully appreciate the pain that you are experiencing now and the re-traumatization you are experiencing now, seeing the deaths of George Floyd and the death that just occurred in Atlanta and so many others, we can't begin to fully internalize that. We understand that. We are your cousin brothers, we are your cousin sisters, and we are here for you. So thank you, everyone. Let's turn these good intentions into direct actions. Because I'm telling you, I've been doing this work for a long time, for decades. And for the first time, as miserable as I am watching events, I'm feeling hope. I'm feeling change. You know, it's so fitting that we're here in front of Gandhiji, because we know where he would have stood were he alive today. He would be at these protests. He would be advocating for nonviolent action and protest. And what we do know is that the purpose of those protests, he often said, was to change broader hearts and minds. And I feel that happening. I've got more white friends today, as opposed to before the death of George Floyd, who are starting to wake up and are starting to realize their privilege and are starting to take action. So, as much as we are feeling this despair, we have to remember that something incredibly important has started, and we're going to be a part of it, and we are going to change things. Thank you.